In the vast, sun-scorched expanse of the African savanna, where life and death perform their eternal, unflinching dance, a scene of primal desperation is unfolding. A lone lion, a magnificent male though his mane is now threaded with the silver of age and hardship, stands encircled. His breath rashes in his chest, each gasp a testament to a battle hard-fought, but far from over. Around him, a cackling, relentless tide of spotted hyenas ebbs and flows, their eyes gleaming with a patient, cruel hunger. The air is thick with tension, with the scent of dust, dry grass, and the metallic tang of fear. This is a siege, ancient and brutal, playing out under a sky that offers no mercy. Before we dive into this extraordinary encounter, let us know where you're watching from in the comments, and if you believe kindness, or perhaps unexpected intervention, exists even in the wildest hearts of nature. Hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories from the animal kingdom. The stakes are starkly, terrifyingly clear. The lion, isolated and weary, is outnumbered. The hyena pack, a finely tuned instrument of attrition, knows that time and numbers are on their side. They dart in, they retreat, their unnerving laughter echoing across the plains, a soundtrack to impending doom. For the old warrior, every snarl, every defensive swipe, drains precious energy he can ill afford to lose. He is a king on the verge of being overthrown, not by a stronger rival, but by the slow, grinding inevitability of the pack. The savanna watches, holding its breath. It seems an inevitable, brutal end, a common story written in tooth and claw. But the savanna holds secrets older than any single hunter, and something wholly unforeseen, is about to shift in that suffocating, heat-drenched silence. The old lion, whose name, had he borne one given by humans, might have been Ascari. The warrior carried the map of many seasons on his scarred muzzle and broad flanks. He had once commanded a sprawling territory, his roar a declaration of dominance that sent shivers through the night. Now, his ribs showed more prominently beneath his tawny coat, and a persistent limp in his left hind leg, a relic from a long-ago buffalo hunt, had slowed his once formidable pace. He had become detached from his pride, a solitary figure navigating the harsh realities of a landscape gripped by a prolonged dry spell. Water sources were shrinking, prey was scarce and wary, and competition for every mouthful was fierce. Observing this grim tableau from the relative safety of a dusty Land Rover, parked a respectful distance away under the sparse shade of a skeletal acacia tree, was Senior Ranger David Kalo. His weathered face, etched with the lines of sun and concentration, was pressed against the eyepiece of his binoculars. For hours, he had watched the hyenas methodically isolate and test the old lion. Park policy was clear: non-intervention in natural predation events unless human activity was the cause of the imbalance. It was a rule he understood, a necessary principle of conservation, but it never sat easily when confronted with such raw, individual struggle. His hand, calloused and capable, rested near the radio, a silent testament to his internal conflict. He'd seen hyenas mob lions before, usually younger or sick individuals, but there was a particular grim determination in this pack, a palpable sense of opportunity. The primary antagonists, the spotted hyenas, were led by a formidable matriarch. She was larger than the males, her shoulders immensely powerful, her jaws capable of crushing bone with terrifying ease. She orchestrated the siege with chilling intelligence, her low grunts and sharp barks directing the pack's movements. They were not merely scavengers, they were apex predators in their own right, and today they sensed a royal feast within their grasp. The environmental threat was an accomplice to their ambition. The relentless sun beat down, baking the earth to a cracked mosaic, and the air shimmered with heat, adding to the lion's exhaustion. A dry, rasping wind offered no relief, only carrying the scent of the lion's distress further, a beacon to the hungry. The matriarch hyena, bold and scarred, made a sudden, darting lunge, a feint towards the lion's injured hind leg. Ascari, with a guttural roar that was more air than thunder, pivoted, lashing out with a paw the size of a dinner plate. His claws, though blunted with age, still commanded respect. The hyena danced back, unharmed, a fresh chorus of cackles erupting from the pack as if applauding her audacity. It was a test, one of many. The lion's eyes, usually burning with amber fire, were clouded with fatigue, but a spark of defiance still flickered within them. He was a monarch, even in his decline, and he would not yield his life easily. The savanna around them was a study in muted browns and faded greens. The great Serengeti ecosystem, though currently parched, pulsed with an undercurrent of resilient life. Distant herds of wildebeest and zebra painted dark smudges against the horizon, too far to offer any distraction or accidental intervention. Closer, the thorn scrub offered little cover for the lion, forcing him to fight in the open, exposed on all sides. The heat was a physical presence, pressing down, sapping moisture and strength. David watched, his brow furrowed, noting the lion's increasingly shallow breathing, the way his head hung lower after each defensive burst. The hyenas, by contrast, seemed energized by the heat and the prospect of a meal, their stamina a well-known asset. He knew, with a grim certainty, that something had to give. The lion's endurance was finite, the hyena's patience seemingly limitless. The sun climbed higher, each degree an added weight to the lion's already burdened shoulders. The inciting incident, when it came, was not a single, dramatic explosion, but a subtle shift in the hyena's tactics. The matriarch let out a series of sharp, staccato barks. It was a signal. The probing and testing were over. The concerted attack was beginning. The circle, which had been a fluid, shifting entity, suddenly tightened, the hyenas lowering their heads, their powerful shoulders bunching. They moved as one, a wave of spotted fur and snapping teeth. This was it. This coordinated surge was the direct consequence of the earlier foreshadowing. The lion's visible fatigue, his favoring of the injured leg, the pack's growing confidence with each unanswered feint. They sensed his reserves dwindling. Askari reacted with the instinct born of 1,000 battles. He roared, a sound of pure, desperate fury, and spun, attempting to keep his attackers in front of him, to prevent them from reaching his vulnerable flanks or rear. But there were too many, too quick. As he lunged at one, another darted in from the side, teeth narrowly missing his hamstring. David, in the Land Rover, leaned forward, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. His training screamed non-intervention, but every fiber of his being yearned to sound the horn, to drive into the melee, to scatter the pack. He fought the urge, his jaw tight. This was nature's brutal theater, and he was but an observer, a chronicler of its unsparing truths. His role was to witness, to record, perhaps to understand, but not to judge, nor to play God. The lion's first major defensive stand was a maelstrom of controlled fury. He met the initial coordinated rush with a desperate flurry of swipes and snarls. One hyena, too bold or too slow, yelped as claws raked its shoulder, drawing blood. It stumbled back, momentarily disrupting the pack's cohesion. But the victory was fleeting, bought at a terrible cost. Askari was panting heavily now, his massive chest heaving. Foam flecked his muzzle. The hyenas regrouped almost instantly, their eerie cackles undiminished, their resolve hardened by the sight of their wounded pack mate and the undeniable weakening of their prey. The sun, a merciless eye in the sky, continued its ascent, baking the very air they breathed. The tension ratcheted up with each passing minute. The hyenas renewed their assault, not in a single wave, but in a series of calculated, probing attacks. Two would feint from the front, drawing the lion's attention, while another pair would try to sneak in from behind, aiming for his vulnerable hindquarters. Askari was a whirlwind of defensive fury, spinning, roaring, snapping, his movements becoming visibly slower, his roars losing their resonant power, becoming hoarse and strained. The dust kicked up by the struggle hung in the air, a choking shroud that coated his tongue and burned his eyes. The heat was an oppressive blanket, magnifying his thirst, his exhaustion. The incessant, maniacal cackling of the hyenas seemed to drill into his skull, a chorus of doom. David Kalo kept his binoculars fixed on the unfolding drama, his heart a heavy stone in his chest. He could see the tiny, telltale signs of the lion's decline, the slight tremor in his forelegs as he braced himself, the way his head drooped for a fraction of a second longer after each exertion, the dullness creeping into his golden eyes. The ranger meticulously noted the hyena's tactics, the matriarch's chilling control. He also scanned the wider horizon, a habit ingrained from years in the bush. Was there anything else out there? A wandering bull elephant whose path might intersect? A rival lion pride that might be drawn by the commotion? The plains remained stubbornly empty, save for the distant, oblivious herds. The drama was self-contained, a crucible of survival. Askari, with a desperate surge of adrenaline, managed to fight his way a few paces towards a stunted, thorny acacia. If he could reach it, put his back to its meager trunk, he could at least limit the angles of attack. The hyenas, sensing his intention, redoubled their efforts to cut him off. He lunged, they scattered and reformed, blocking his path. A near success, immediately followed by a dead end. The physical strain was immense, but David could also sense the psychological toll, the erosion of hope, the mounting frustration. The old lion was fighting not just a pack of hyenas, but his own failing body, the relentless sun, and the crushing weight of inevitability. David remembered stories his grandfather, also a ranger, used to tell, tales of legendary lions, of epic hunts, of the deep respect the Maasai people held for these magnificent cats, even as they were sometimes adversaries. He felt a profound connection to this struggling animal, a sense of shared existence on this ancient land. The non-intervention policy felt like a betrayal of that connection, yet he knew its necessity for the larger ecosystem. It was the ranger's paradox, a burden carried daily. The hyena matriarch, sensing a critical moment of weakness, decided to press her advantage. She let out a high-pitched, excited yelp that galvanized the pack. Then, she herself led a charge, not a feint this time, but a direct, committed assault. She lunged low, aiming for the lion's already injured leg, a tactic designed to cripple and bring him down. Askari met her with a desperate, sideways sweep of his paw. His claws connected, but not solidly. The matriarch yelped in pain and surprise, a shallow gash appearing on her snout, but her momentum carried her past him. Other hyenas surged into the momentary gap. It was then that Askari stumbled. His front legs buckled for a horrifying instant. He recovered, but the effort cost him dearly. He was visibly flagging, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. The hyenas saw it. A wave of fresh excitement, a perceptible heightening of their aggression, rippled through the pack. They closed in, their cackles becoming a triumphant, almost deafening crescendo. The lion sank slightly, his great head low, his eyes briefly closing as if in resignation. For a heart-stopping moment, David thought it was over. He gripped his binoculars so tightly his knuckles ached, his own breath caught in his throat. The matriarch, blood dripping from her snout, turned, ready to lead the final, overwhelming rush. The air was thick with the taste of dust and despair. But just as the lead hyenas tensed to make their final, fatal lunge, a sound ripped through the heated air, a sound utterly alien to the immediate conflict. It wasn't a roar, nor was it the cackle of a hyena. It was a deep, guttural snort, followed by a thunderous crashing that seemed to shake the very ground beneath David's Land Rover. Every head, lion and hyena alike, snapped up, ears swiveling, bodies frozen in mid-motion. The hyenas' triumphant chorus died in their throats, replaced by confused, nervous whines. Askari, too, lifted his battered head, a flicker of something unreadable in his exhausted eyes. A new actor had just stormed onto the stage, and from the expressions of sheer, sudden panic on the faces of the hyenas, it was not a welcome one. A colossal, dark shape was materializing from a dense thicket of acacia scrub about 100 yards away, moving with astonishing speed and unmistakable intent. The game-changer, the creature no one expected, was a massive black rhinoceros. It burst from the thorn scrub like a runaway boulder, its enormous head lowered, its formidable front horn pointing like a grotesque lance. Dust plumed behind its thundering hoofs. Black rhinos are notorious for their unpredictable tempers and aggressive territoriality, often charging first and investigating later. This one, perhaps disturbed by the protracted commotion of the hunt, or simply on a direct path that the lion and hyenas unfortunately occupied, was a vision of pure, unadulterated prehistoric fury. The hyenas, so bold and confident moments before, were now utterly petrified. Their well-orchestrated siege dissolved into a panicked scramble for safety. The lion, momentarily forgotten, was also in the path of this new, indiscriminate danger, but he was too exhausted to move quickly. The rhino was not charging to save the lion. It was charging to clear its perceived territory of a disturbance, and anything in its way was a target. The window of opportunity this chaos provided for Askari was perilously brief. The hyenas, instinctually recognizing a far greater and more immediate threat than the weakened lion, scattered in all directions, yelping in terror. David Kalo could only watch, stunned into momentary silence. He'd witnessed many incredible things in his years on the savannah, but never an intervention quite like this. He fumbled for his camera, then decided against it, his priority shifting to simply observing and ensuring his own vehicle wasn't in the rhino's potential path if it decided to redirect its charge. The rhino wasn't slowing down. It was a 2-ton battering ram of muscle, hide, and rage, heading straight for the spot where the lion still stood, swaying on his feet. The air exploded with sound and motion. The rhino, snorting like a steam engine, thundered into the area where the hyenas had been moments before. It didn't specifically target any single hyena. Its charge was a force of nature, a blind display of power. The ground vibrated with its impact. Several hyenas, too slow to get clear, were sent tumbling by glancing blows from its massive shoulders or narrowly avoided being trampled by its huge, three-toed feet. Their confident cackles were replaced by yelps of pain and terror as they fled, disappearing into the long grass as quickly as their legs could carry them. They wanted no part of this enraged behemoth. Askari, the old lion, seemed to find a last reserve of strength fueled by pure survival instinct. As the rhino bore down, not specifically at him, but at the general area he occupied, he managed a clumsy, sideways leap, a desperate scramble that took him a few crucial feet out of the direct path of the charge. He collapsed in a heap, panting, but momentarily out of the most immediate danger. The rhino, having plowed through the epicenter of the former confrontation, continued its charge for another 50 yards, its momentum carrying it past the stunned lion. It then slowed, skidding to a halt in a cloud of dust, and began to snort and stamp, surveying its now cleared domain with truculent satisfaction. It turned its great horned head this way and that, small eyes peering out from beneath folds of thick skin, as if daring any other creature to challenge its passage. The hyena matriarch, from a very safe distance, let out a frustrated, subdued bark, but there was no rallying the pack now. The rhino was an entirely different proposition than an exhausted lion. The risk-reward calculation had shifted catastrophically against them. One by one, the hyenas melted further into the landscape, their forms becoming indistinguishable from the termite mounds and low bushes. The promise of a hard-won feast had vanished in an instant, replaced by the terrifying reality of the rhino's explosive temper. The rhino, after a few more minutes of aggressive posturing, tossing its head, pawing the earth, and emitting loud, breathy snorts, seemed to deem the area sufficiently pacified. It gave one last, long look in the general direction of the lion, who remained sprawled on the ground, too weak to move further, and then, with a final, dismissive snort, it turned and ambled off at a surprisingly brisk pace. Disappearing back into the acacia scrub from whence it came, its passage marked by the rustling of leaves and the snapping of small branches. Silence, profound and almost shocking after the preceding cacophony, descended upon the savannah. The dust began to settle, painting the air with a hazy, golden light. Askari lay where he had fallen, his flanks heaving, his eyes closed. For a long moment, David wondered if the shock and the final exertion had been too much. The old warrior was utterly still. Then, slowly, painstakingly, one great, scarred ear twitched, flicking away a persistent fly. A shudder ran through his massive frame. He was alive. David let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He lowered his binoculars, his hands slightly trembling. He made a quick note in his logbook. Approximate 1540 hours hyena pack, approximate 12 individuals, mobbing adult male lion. Siege broken by unexpected charge of adult black rhinoceros. Hyenas dispersed. Lion alive, condition extremely poor. It was an understatement of an epic encounter. He would continue to monitor the lion from a distance. Intervention was still not an option unless the lion was clearly suffering from something directly human-caused, but he could at least ensure the area remained undisturbed while the old warrior attempted to recover. Slowly, agonizingly, Askari began to move. First, he lifted his heavy head, his gaze sweeping his surroundings. The hyenas were gone. The air was still, save for the distant chirping of unseen birds and the buzz of insects. With a deep groan that seemed to emanate from the very core of his being, he pushed himself up, first onto his forelegs, then, with a visible, trembling effort, to all fours. He stood there, swaying, a monumental figure of battered resilience. His tawny coat was matted with dust and dried saliva, and fresh, shallow scratches adorned his flanks, but he was standing. He took a tentative step, then another. Each movement was clearly in agony, but he moved. The sun was beginning its slow descent towards the western horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange, pink, and violet. The oppressive heat of midday was finally starting to relent, replaced by the softer, cooler air of approaching evening. Askari, driven by an instinct as old as time, began to make his slow, painful way towards a dense thicket of thorn bushes that offered some measure of cover and shade, the same thicket from which the rhino had so dramatically emerged. It was as if some faint, lingering scent of the rhino's formidable power offered a perverse sense of security. He didn't look back. There was no interaction, no acknowledgement of the bizarre, almost miraculous intervention that had saved his life. The rhino had acted out of its own territorial imperative, not altruism. Yet, the result was the same. The siege was broken, the immediate threat neutralized. Askari had been granted a reprieve, a chance to rest, to perhaps find water, to gather what remained of his strength. His survival was by no means guaranteed. He was old, injured, and utterly alone in a harsh and unforgiving world. But he was alive, and for a lion, life itself is a constant fight, a continuous striving. Hope, in its rawest, most primal form, was simply the next breath, the next step. David watched until Askari had disappeared into the shadows of the thicket. He knew the lion's road to recovery, if it came at all, would be long and arduous. He might succumb to his injuries, or to starvation, or another predator might find him in his weakened state. But for now, against all odds, against the calculated cruelty of the pack, the old king still drew breath. An unexpected titan of another kind, a creature of immense power and blind fury, had inadvertently carved out a moment of astonishing, unintended grace on the unforgiving canvas of the African plains. As twilight deepened, casting long shadows across the savanna, a fragile, temporary peace settled over the land, heavy with the scent of dust, exertion, and the enduring, indomitable will to survive. The quiet majesty of the moment is profound. The hunter, moments from death, now rests, granted an unlikely second chance by a force of nature that knew nothing of mercy, only of its own powerful presence. It's a stark reminder of the complex, interconnected, and often brutal web of life where survival can turn on the most unexpected of encounters. And then, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, a deep, resonant silence, broken only by the whisper of the evening breeze through the dry grass, returned to the savanna. Thanks for watching. If this story of an unbelievable intervention in the tenacity of life in the wild touched you, give it a like and subscribe for more wild moments of wonder.